Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Web Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and we are very fortunate today to welcome as our special guest Vanessa Beeley. She obviously needs no introduction to Gagglers. She's a writer, a blogger, a journalist, an activist. She has been very actively involved in Middle Eastern politics for many years. Her father was a very distinguished historian and diplomat, Sir Harold Beeley. He was British ambassador to Nasser's Egypt, so that's something. And obviously, there's a lot of stuff that we want to get to. So, what we want to basically know is where are we at the moment? Netanyahu says Israel is involved in a seven-front war, which kind of reflects on Israel's popularity in the region, but seven front war. So basically, I've just simply asked, what exactly are Israel's goals, and is Israel on the road to achieving them?
Well, I mean, I think that's quite easy. A lot of people dismiss Netanyahu as this completely irrational, nihilistic genocidaire. But in fact, what Israel is doing, of course, on behalf of the US, and Robert F. Kennedy pointed this out not so many months ago when he basically gave a statement, a very clear statement, saying that Israel serves not only as their military outpost, but as their bulwark against the rise of the global south, or rather the freedom of the global south from US occupation, effectively. And also, of course, China, Russia, Iran, the non-aligned bloc, the BRICS alliance, etc. So this is Israel's role for the United States. But in my opinion, Israel also has its own agenda, which of course is this, first of all, to destroy what is perceived as the resistance axis countries. Doesn't necessarily mean occupation of those countries, but it means the destruction of the infrastructure of those countries to weaken and isolate those countries that they've been unable to do in the past. For example, the regime change war against Syria was effectively largely sponsored by Israel. The terrorist groups were funded, armed, and hospitalized by Israel. That failed. And so now what this is about, effectively, is to make Israel the economic energy resource hub in the region. And that is demonstrated by Netanyahu's blessing and curse map at the UNGA, when in reality he's talking about the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. So the connection between India, the Gulf states that have already effectively been normalized in their relations with Israel, Gaza to be destroyed according to Netanyahu's plans, the so-called humanitarian bubbles and gated communities to be established, now we know potentially under the control of British mercenary private security companies, and for Israel to benefit from Palestinian gas reserves, the gas reserves in all of the Levant, of course, all of the coast from Syria down to Lebanon and Palestine, and for Gaza itself to become integrated in this India-Middle East corridor as a free trade zone and an industrial zone, benefiting from the use of the Palestinian gas and benefiting from it as a land bridge, of course, to El Arish in Egypt, from where the energy resources will then be transported to Egypt.
Obviously, that's the same.
Yeah.
That does not include the Palestinians.
Yes. Yeah, well, yes, exactly. I mean, at the moment, of course, what we're seeing is a wholesale slaughter of the Palestinians in the north.
Is the goal, sorry to interrupt, is the goal to eliminate the Palestinian population of Gaza altogether, just to get rid of them, or what's the?
It's not necessarily to eliminate all of them. That's why they're talking about the humanitarian bubbles or the gated communities, which are nothing more than concentration camps within a concentration camp. Mm-hmm. Right, and within those camps, the Palestinians that remain, of course, the children, if there are any remaining, because children have been the main target of the Zionist entity, of course, will be indoctrinated against the resistance. So in this way, when they talk about eliminating Hamas, in my opinion, it's not only a physical elimination of a Hamas, which so far is proven impossible. It's an elimination of the ideology of resistance through this brutal genocide that's been ongoing for 100 years, but of course intensified.
But is there any historical precedent where that has actually worked out?
No.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of colonial resistance movements. When was one snuffed out and de-radicalized?
Well, you could say the American Indians.
Yeah, yeah. And you could maybe move into the category of like Germany and Japan, but that was much more ideological.
Yeah.
But that wasn't colonial. Um, yeah, I suppose the Americans can, and I suppose the Australians can take that
Yeah.
trophy as well. Uh, yeah, it completely unequal power. But there is a difference now. This is the 21st century, and this after the Second World War, we decided as collectively that this should not be done. I mean, I've had Israelis tell me, "Well, you did it to Native Americans. Why can't we do it to Palestinians?" And I just said we all agreed that it wasn't a good idea, particularly since your people were the victim of it during the Second World War. Okay, I was being facetious there. I guess the real question is, will they succeed with this plan?
No, I mean, that's a very good question. And actually, it's interesting on your point because, is it Yone Belarra, the Spanish politician, put out a statement today, which I thought was probably the strongest from a strategy perspective for a European MP. And she basically said we should stop seeing what is happening in Palestine in correlation with apartheid. Should be in correlation with Nazism, what is going on. Because this is ethnic cleansing, the master race. We're back in that paradigm. Yeah. And what she actually said is it should be punished through Nuremberg courts, just as the Nazis were punished. The supply of weapons should completely cease. Of course, we know that this is going to be extremely difficult, but this is effectively what we should be working towards, even as an international community, in my opinion. Will Israel succeed? I mean, I have to say what's happening in West Bank and in Gaza is horrifying to me. There seems to be absolutely no capacity to actually stop it. Yep. And now what we're seeing in Lebanon is pretty much the same pattern, the same rhetoric looking for ceasefire, which they absolutely know Hezbollah is not going to accept, just as they knew Hamas was not going to accept Israel's ceasefire proposals, which was constantly changing. They were constantly adding new elements to the proposal, even after Hamas had accepted, I think back in July, Biden's final written proposal. Hamas accepted it, and Netanyahu added another clause, which of course Hamas would refuse. And the same game is being played in Lebanon as they destroy infrastructure and entire villages in the south of Lebanon. And they know perfectly well that Hezbollah are not going to move back beyond the Litani River. This is not going to happen because the south is the home, not of Hezbollah, but of people of Lebanese nationality. And this is very important for people to understand. This isn't a war against Hezbollah. This is a war against Lebanon. It's the destruction of Lebanon as a country. It's already started with the Beirut port blast, with the endless Ponzi schemes and erosion of Beirut.
The Beirut port blast, the one a few years ago?
Yeah.
And that was Israeli?
Yeah, 2020.
Yeah, that was Israeli? The Israelis were behind that?
Most Lebanese would tell you that. I don't think we've had kind of smoking gun evidence on that, but it's always the case of who benefits. Mm-hmm. Right. And of course the rhetoric immediately was to blame Hezbollah, but Hezbollah has no control in this area. Actually, this area is predominantly under the control of the Chinese, the US, and Mossad. So who would predominantly have access to those stores of chemicals?
I mean, just as a aside, everybody knew it was a huge problem, and blame goes all over the place. If you know
Yeah.
something potentially that devastating, and it was just literally a ticking time bomb. Okay.
Mm.
I have a lot of friends. I've had so many people tell me they were there that day. It
Mm.
just
Yeah,
surreal
and it was
to go
awful.
through
I mean,
something.
here, I was here in the west of Damascus, and we heard the explosion, and within 20 minutes, the yellow cloud was over us. I mean, it was extraordinary. Even from our perspective, we heard it and felt it.
So the Israeli goal in Lebanon is what? Just simply to destroy Lebanon as a functioning state, just so that it becomes
Yeah, I
just
mean,
a client state of Israel and plus Israeli occupation of whatever territory it wants.
well, in my opinion, there's two wars ongoing in Lebanon. One is the military war, the Zionist, US-backed, UK-backed, EU-backed war against Hezbollah, the resistance factions, which are actually not only Hezbollah, there are Christian resistance factions. And as a friend of mine described the other day, she's a young Arab Lebanese Christian living in Lebanon, supports the resistance, and in fact came back from Europe to stand by Hezbollah. But as she said, this is an Arab issue. And therefore, whether we are Arab Christians or Arab Sunni or Arab Shia, it doesn't matter. We are Arabs. And this is a national cause to prevent Zionist US occupation of our territory, just as we did with the Crusaders. This is actually how she framed it. And I thought that's a very intelligent way of looking at it, because that, if you like, erases these sectarian narratives that are being promulgated by Western media and Western officials in order to create this second layer war of factions that despise Hezbollah, like, for example, the Christian phalangists, who are effectively Christian Zionists, although that's an oxymoron in itself, who were, of course, responsible for massacres like Sabra and Shatila in 1982 when Hezbollah was created in response to Sabra and Shatila and the invasion of Lebanon by the Zionists. So there's two wars. There's the Zionist direct military war, and then this other kind of intelligence war to try and infiltrate structures within Lebanon. British intelligence has been doing this for years. The same players that were responsible for the destabilization in Syria and have been operating by proxy inside Syria. Those same players have infiltrated intelligence in Lebanon, political parties in Lebanon, military, and so on. And now, of course, they're triggering their proxies in Lebanon to turn against Hezbollah, and Israel is profiting from this. But if you look at where they're bombing all of Lebanon. I mean, Baalbek, one of the biggest cities, was just told to evacuate. I don't know how many tens of thousands of people live there, but this is insanity.
But you obviously, but you obviously remember in 1982, the goal was when they invaded, well, partly obviously to destroy the PLO, but another part of it was to create a satellite state in Lebanon, and their man then was Bashir Gemayel, but he was assassinated, and so Israel didn't really succeed in what it wanted, but. So are they now going back to that idea of just creating a government in Lebanon that will be completely beholden to Israel?
Very similar, yes. They don't seem capable of kind of developing or evolving the blueprint. Because if you think about it, that's pretty much what they've tried to do from former Yugoslavia onwards, right? But I think now what we're seeing, with the rise of BRICS, with the rise of the non-aligned axis, let's say, which has effectively empowered the resistance axis in West Asia, I think Israel and the US and the UK even are seeing this commodity grab slipping away from them. And so the window of opportunity for them to follow through with however you want to call their strategy, whether it's kind of the Greater Israel Plan and so on, that window is narrowing. And that's why I think now we're suddenly seeing this acceleration.
Well, I mean, it's funny that you guys are talking about the original blueprint for Lebanon, and that came to naught.
Mm,
I don't see any reason why it would come to fruition today. But
mm,
the it really gets down to kind of a balance of power, and in the case of Israel, the terrorism quotient, because that's really the only thing that they have. They can't appeal to you. You said that your friend described is a war on Arabs. With I think then that's really smart way of looking at it.
mm.
Uh, so I mean, I don't see Israel prevailing, but I don't see the resistance prevailing either. And that creates a really kind of depressing scenario is that we're just going to have an enormous amount of violence moving forward. I don't see Hezbollah buckling. I mean, you're going to kill a lot of them. You're going to destroy a lot of their infrastructure, but I don't think you can get rid of Hezbollah. I
No.
mean, so many Lebanese I know, in Christian Lebanese, and I mean,
Mm,
they wear a pin, Hezbollah. They want everyone to know.
mm.
But that means it's, we all know that Lebanon is a pretty fragile place on the best of days. And seeing what's going on now, this going back to, what is it, 1701, and then and Netanyahu added all of these other demands for some kind of
Yeah.
ceasefire. That's not going to happen. But for me, it's just kind of a dilemma. How do we move forward? Because look, a year in, I mean, Hamas still fires missiles, fireworks for the most part, but they still can fire missiles into Israel.
Mm.
Where do we go from this? This seems like such a precedent moment of where it could go, but this moment could last a very long time.
Yeah, it could. And I think even here in Syria, we're very much preparing for an increase, for an escalation here. Gideon Sa'ar the other day, who's the Netanyahu's preferred war minister. I'm not going to call them defense ministers because Yoav Gallant now is perceived as too soft. So, which is ridiculous because, I mean, Gallant is just as much a kind of...
Is that a good cop, bad cop play for the
Yeah.
West? Yeah.
In my opinion, yes. I've said that from the beginning because this is what the Israel lobby invented, was this kind of taking a position, creating the opposition to look as if you're entertaining opposition to the position, and then boom, you still move forward with the intent, with the direction of travel, right? I mean, they are experts at this. And I've said this right from the beginning because, look, if Netanyahu goes tomorrow, there'll be 10 other Netanyahus that will be far worse. I mean, look at Smotrich and Ben Gvir and Gideon Sa'ar. And as I said, he actually issued a threat to President Assad the other day. He actually said, if you continue to harbor terrorists, in other words, Hezbollah, Iraqi resistance, or Islamic resistance Iraq, Iranians, whoever, whatever member of that resistance axis, if they are being harbored on Syrian territory, which they are, I mean, Syria has every right to do that. Hezbollah was instrumental in defeating the Western-led project here in Syria to topple Assad and basically partition Syria into sectarian statelets, which then, of course, is connected to the 1997 clean break doctrine that Netanyahu commissioned from Richard Perle and, well, from the CIA, basically, in America. So threatening Assad himself, threatening the government here in Syria, and basically saying, we failed. After 13 years of regime change, we failed. We tried to help the Kurds to basically settle in the northeast. I mean, it was quite an extraordinary admission from Sa'ar, I have to say, because I can't remember when Israel has openly admitted that they were effectively very much behind the regime change in Syria, and they also, of course, support the Kurds in Iran, in Iraq, and in Syria to basically weaken their enemy state.
Sorry, there was the story the other day. It didn't get much play that the Americans bombed Syria. They were bombing ISIS, and it was a very strange story because we know that Americans don't attack ISIS, they don't bomb ISIS. And so I kind of wondered, is this part of this play that we have been expecting, that Israel is going to make some kind of an onslaught on Syria? Was this part of it, or what was that about?
And just to follow up on that, this kind of plays into the manufactured theme of this is a civilizational clash. It's the West against barbarians, and and so you put everyone, it's fighting terrorism. It doesn't matter if it's Hamas, it's Assad, it's
Right, but except
I
ISIS.
mean,
So that's
this kind,
just
I
curious.
agree,
But
but
why do they suddenly bring up ISIS? Because
but I think the reason is they're creating this framework, this meta theme that this is a war against barbarism, okay? And so you got to throw everybody in because I have said from the very beginning, all the way back in after October 7th, that there are groups, players in the region, of course, with American and British, European help, but everybody sees this as a solve all problems.
right, okay, but can we just
Forever.
talk about? Yeah, all right, go.
No, but I think that plays
Yeah,
into
okay.
it. Go ahead, Vanessa.
um,
We do
I
this
like
all
No,
the
no, 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 no.
time. I'm
I mean,
no,
sorry.
do carry on.
I mean, just but ISIS, and then address Peter's point. So
Yes. Well, the ISIS thing, of course, I mean, I think I do to some degree agree with Peter, but I think it's probably more to do with the fact that the US is still trying to maintain this narrative for the US population that they are doing good during their occupation, their illegal occupation of Syria, and even Iraq to some extent, while of course they are enabling ISIS to flourish. They are keeping ISIS in holding camps, more than 15,000 in the northeast, and they're ferrying them around from Iraq to Syria. In Iraq, they're being retrained. There's recruitment going on. They're destroying electricity infrastructure in Iraq. So this is another little war that's kind of simmering along under the surface. And in my opinion, so I think this narrative of we bombed Baghdadi for the 15th time, or we killed an ISIS leader for the 10th time, because we always discover they've already killed them before according to their storyline, it's just to maintain this belief in the American public that is remarkably gullible to some degree in the fact that the US is there for protecting people in Syria, of course. In the meantime, I think what Syria has been doing, because I think, in my opinion, what Hamas did on October the 7th kind of accelerated things a lot faster than even the rest of the resistance axis really wanted. Syria needed more time to finish the war in its own country. I mean, it's still occupied on 3/4 of its borders, effectively. And so what I then saw was Syria starting to very quickly kind of divert military into the central desert area to try and basically finish ISIS with Russia's help. In the northwest, we've seen Jolani leading an escalated military campaign, so the army has been forced to go to the northwest to combat that, which of course is in collaboration with Israel. That's absolutely undeniable, because we've seen that through the last 13 years. Whenever there was a campaign to liberate, whether it was East Aleppo, Eastern Damascus, Homs, Israel would be bombing Syrian army positions as the terrorists were shelling Damascus or Aleppo, etc. So, this is normal. They work in absolute parallel, the terrorist groups and Israel. So in my opinion, Syria is understanding the pressure and trying to settle some of the conflict areas, some of the more sensitive conflict areas before escalation. And yes, it has opened its territories, because Syria, I do know that Syria, immediately after October the 7th, spoke with Hezbollah and said, we're prepared to send a brigade to help with the resistance. And Nasrallah's response was no. Syria needs to, you are our most important land bridge. You're the backbone of this geographical resistance axis. We can't afford for you to be in trouble. And so therefore Syria opened up its territory to resistance factions to target particularly the occupied Golan, but also other areas inside the occupied territories. That included Islamic resistance in Iraq. It included Hezbollah and any manner of other factions that kind of wanted to join in, really, in defense of Palestine.
One of the interesting things is George and I have talked about this, and we're talking about Syria as a nation state, as a functioning, recognized nation state. But everybody else, this is the evolution that we've seen. We're not dealing with states, we're dealing with organizations. Hamas, Hezbollah, we have the groups in Iraq. I mean, it's really kind of changed the dynamic because we all know the sentiment inside of Jordan is clear on how they see things unfolding. But of course, that's not how the regime supported by Israel and the United States and others feel that way. So it's very interesting that you're dealing with non-nation states because these nation states are just, they're hollow shells. I mean, you look at Egypt, we look at Jordan. And they're very fragile, extremely fragile, and I think this is a long struggle, and I'm not convinced the two regimes in Egypt or Jordan is going to survive this. But so we haven't talked about really an important issue is the Israeli attack on Iran because this is the retaliation. There's so many different stories out there. It's really quite incredible. Alistair Crook, which I know you're aware of, he's come out with a very, which for me was really quite definitive. I mean, far more so, even people that we would be nominally in our camp, but he was much more detailed. A lot of other people felt were very tepid to go there. My gut goes with his analysis here. This was a real failure for the Israelis.
Yeah, it was. Can I just say also that Yemen is a state actor
in
the resistance?
Right.
Very important one, of course, adhering to the Genocide Convention, preventing and punishing genocide. So we have to kind of, or I at least salute.
Well, Norman Finkelstein thinks they should get the Nobel Peace Prize.
I think they should. My God, I mean, this country is under siege, blockade, bombing since 2015. And now Saudi Arabia is being told you've got to go and start the war again.
Well, if I ever get in conflict with a nation state, I'm going to have Yemen on my side.
Yeah. There was a wonderful rumor, which actually I had to kind of I messaged. I'm sure he won't mind me saying this, but I did message Alistair to say there's no 40,000 Yemenis inside Syria because it was this wonderful story that was circulating on social media, and I was like, where are they? Because I want to go and say thank you guys, but no, of course they're not here. There's a lot of misinformation being attributed to Israel right now. They're starting all these rumors, and a lot of this was about pretext to bomb Syria, because now they've started this whole rumor that Syria is developing nuclear weapons, which is just...
Well, there are also North Koreans in Russia.
Oh, yeah, I know, yeah. Oh, no, North Korea is also, according to one Hebrew University report, North Korea is here helping Syria to develop nuclear technology. So
right. Well, I mean, they did bomb Syria back God, was it still in the Bush administration when they bombed Syria? They were alleging that somehow they were developing nuclear. This was a nuclear facilities.
That was
under Bush or Obama. I can't remember now.
No, it was Bush.
Yeah,
it was Bush. No, and it was Israel that bombed.
It was Israel that bombed. That's right.
And Bush was like,
exactly.
well
that's
done.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, you did that to Iraq, and now you're doing it to Syria. So
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but the question was about Iran.
Exactly.
Yes, sorry, I kind of digressed there.
George and I digress all the time for hours on end.
Feel free to digress. Yeah, I mean, I think, I think I put out a tweet after the second wave, because there were allegedly 3 waves, and I said, well, it took 100 Zionist war jets to set a bush on fire in Tehran, because that was the only evidence of any damage in Tehran that at that point we were receiving. And then allegedly they carried out this third wave. I only just started listening to Alistair just before I came on, so I don't actually know what his theory about the whole attack was. But in my opinion, yeah, it was a failure. I mean, for goodness sake, you know, this is a nation that is wall to wall carpeted with American weapons, and some of the most sophisticated weapons that America has developed. And those are used, Gaza is effectively used as a testbed for those weapons. And now, of course, they're being sold on based on their success in the genocide in Palestine, which is just appalling.
Well, I mean, Alistair's theory of the case, and you know, he obviously is well acquainted with has many contacts and sources, but he thinks it was Russian anti-missile technology that was really turned the corner there.
Yeah.
I mean, essentially, the Israelis in the first wave, they saw something. We don't know what that is. We're not going in there because the risk is too high. And it turned out to be a dud. I mean, and there seems to be evidence that some of the missiles actually fell inside of Iraq, didn't even make it into Iran. So,
yeah, I had heard that.
you know, always these things. You know, I saw images of Netanyahu and Gallant after, and they were using victory, but their body language and their facial expression was almost panic. It was just like,
well, and also the wonderful fact that Gallant was staring at a screen that had an image that was from 2021, that had nothing to do with that actual attack. I did wonder if that was photoshopped, but apparently it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, as far as I can work out, you know, Iran did take a long time to prepare its defenses, obviously, to prepare itself for any retaliation once it retaliated. And of course, we have to remind people this was a legitimate retaliation by Iran for the assassination of Haniyeh in Tehran during the inauguration of President Pezeshkian.
Well, and as far as I know, that Sergei Shoigu, he was from Russia. He was twice in Iran as the anticipation for the attack was. So, I mean, and again, I have to use Alistair Crook. I mean, I'm not, I live here, but I'm not getting it from here. There are a lot of Russian technicians as well. So, I mean, the reason why I bring that up, because, you know, we're talking about, I'm assuming this is going to be a very long and bloody and destructive process. But if we understand from people like Alistair Crook that the playing field is getting a little bit more balanced out, that's turning into a real dilemma for the Israelis, because obviously they want to take out the axis of resistance. They want to take out Hamas, Hezbollah. We can't forget about our friends in Yemen, and then of course Iraq. But of course it's all centered on Iran. And this plays into the American narrative. I believe that for the Americans, they want to maintain hegemony in the region and deny outside powers. Okay, that's one thing. And if the Israelis want to commit genocide to promote that goal, well, let them do it. Okay, it's so embarrassing for us. You know, the Secretary of State has to go 11 times to the region. What did he get? And did he get anything after 11 visits? I mean, George, how many times did Henry Kissinger do his shuttle diplomacy? I mean, it was like 4 or 5 trips. Okay, and he got something. Okay. So, I mean, this is the very broad picture of it, because I think the American interest is not a two-state solution, obviously, but dislodging Russia and Iran simultaneously. They're thinking big. You got to give them that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as I said in the beginning, this is all about commodity, resource, economy, trade, control, and freezing out Russia and China and BRICS, basically. You know, I think one thing that I mean, I do speak to a few Russians here within the military and within the Reconciliation Center and so on. They are realizing that they are at great risk of losing their footprint, their only footprint in the Middle East, which is at Hajmim in Tartus naval base on the eastern Mediterranean coast of Syria. And I have heard that they are aware of this and that they're preparing also, because as Gideon Saar pointed out, Syria is next. I mean, they've already increased the number of bombing raids against Syria, and it's very clear that they're trying to clear a path through air defense, particularly in the south, because the south is probably the most vulnerable area, because Israel already occupies Golan, which borders onto, Syrian Quneitra and then the Syrian south. There are still uncontrolled elements within Daraa, which is south of Damascus, which, according to Western propaganda, was the cradle of the non-revolution. You have Israel and the United States backing the separatist movement among the Druze, also in the south, in Sweden. I mean, it's a minority, but nevertheless, it's power multiplied because the US at the military base in Al Tanf, which is in the triangle between Iraq, Jordan, and Syria, are recruiting and harboring armed groups there. And they've created this 55-kilometer exclusion zone on Syrian territory around their base. Rukban refugee camp, which is to the south of Al Tanf, is also a terrorist recruitment center where they're, where ISIS are holed up and are being sent out to attack Russian and Syrian army positions on a regular basis. So the south is the most vulnerable, and Israel knows this. So of course what it's been doing is bombing the radar systems, the air defense systems in the south. It's destroyed all of the borders. I mean, funnily enough, I was looking today at how on earth I can get to Lebanon. I have to travel, I think it's about 600 miles now. I'm 15 minutes from the border. But I can't go through this border because they bombed it once, and I thought, well, it's okay, I can walk, the car can leave me, I can walk to where the crater is, I can climb up and come down, and the car can meet me the other side. No, they bombed the whole road at this point. So, I mean, it's...
But this raises an interesting question, Vanessa, because, Russia, which stepped in 2015 on behalf of Damascus to crush ISIS. But since then, Russia has said, well, we don't have a position on this issue of Israel bombing Syria when Israel bombed Syria in order to attack the transit of Iranian missiles to Lebanon. And say, well, this is between Israel and Lebanon, Israel and Iran. We don't have a position on that. We're not getting involved in that. But what you're describing is that this is far more extensive, what Israel is now doing in Syria. So then the real question is, well, what does Russia do about it? Because after all, as you say, Russia could just lose its one position in the Middle East if Assad is overthrown.
Yeah, and I think that's palpably clear to them. And I think you saw it fairly recently. I can't remember how many weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was an attack which I think was combined Israel and the terrorist groups north of Latakia, which got very close to the Haimamim base. I mean, they targeted a warehouse very close to Haimamim, and the attack went on for, I think, almost 2 hours. Now, at that point, Russian air defense got involved, and Russian jets were patrolling off the coast of Latakia and Tartus for some time after the attack to ensure that it was clear. So I think, and one thing Russia is really bad at is publicity. They're very bad at telling people what they're doing that's a good thing, because Russia, so many people ask me about this, like, why is Russia not getting directly involved from an air defense perspective with the Israeli aggression against Syria and against Iranian military personnel and advisors in Syria and so on? Because Russia, and it's a very Western perspective, because we're used to, when we have a client state, we are literally in charge of that client state and we manage its affairs. Russia doesn't do that. It has a military base, it collaborates with Damascus, it collaborates on a military basis, on an economic basis, on a diplomatic basis, but it's collaboration. It's not control of. And so therefore it respects the sovereignty of Syria and the capability of Syrian air defense to defend its airspace. Mm-hmm. This isn't going to happen without discussion with Damascus. So it's clear to me that Damascus has said, no, stand back, don't get involved, we can handle it. And also, Syria hasn't been using its S-300. It's not used it yet.
To back that up, George has already mentioned it, but in 2015, and I think it was in September, Putin announced that he was honoring the invitation from Damascus, and Russian assets went there, and they did their job for 6 weeks, and then they said we're done, and they downgraded their presence. They sent the planes home. That's how they operate. What's the mission? Did you hear any generals, Russian No, it's not their job. Somebody else. I'm not a spokesman. Somebody else does that. Okay. And it's really interesting. Donald Trump takes complete credit for it. He says it all the time. I got rid of ISIS in 6 weeks. Well, he said, who gets rid of them doesn't matter to me. Okay. So, yeah, but I'm just with you. It's very low profile. I mean, they went in, they did their job, and they left.
Yeah,
right, but as you're saying is that that basically Syria is in danger. I mean, that there's a real threat now to Syria.
Yeah, there is, and I think how Russia is recognizing that threat is, for example, I talked about the Syrian Arab Army mobilizing to the northwest to deal with the threat from Jolani, which, by the way, has been enabled also by Ukrainian specialist military advisors and intelligence who've been in the northwest and have also been recruiting terrorists from the northwest of Syria to go and fight for them in Ukraine. But they've also in return provided technology, provided weapons, provided training for those armed groups that are dominated by Al-Qaeda under whatever moniker you want to attribute to them. So what you're seeing is Russia, in fact, Russia precipitated the bombing campaign. Experts within Syria were saying, no, hold back because we can actually wait a little bit and get more information. And Russia was like, no, no, we'll start the bombing campaign now, because everyone here had the intelligence that Jolani was about to lead an intense attack from the northwest using a drone warfare, but also military on the ground warfare. So Russia, again, as I said, it's very quietly getting on with trying to at least clear up certain areas within Syria that are particularly sensitive. So the center, which is the ISIS operational territory, and the northwest. And they've also been tangling on a fairly regular basis with the US in the northeast, So, Russia is heavily involved. And I would guess there are discussions going on militarily as to how they help Syria to prepare, just as, in theory, they helped Iran to prepare.
Well, that goes back to what I said earlier, is that to solve all problems everywhere forever. And I can't see how Syria, as we've already mentioned, cannot be outside of that. Vanessa, a very broad question, and I don't know if you have an answer. I'm not sure anybody has an answer. Are we already in the middle of the Third World War?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, I mean, I used to say this even about the war in Syria, because if you look at what was going on, I mean, who was involved in it? The US, the UK, the EU, the Gulf states, I mean, particularly Qatar and Saudi Arabia, until 2017, were heavily involved in the funding of the war. And then you had all the Five Eyes countries and so on. And who were they confronting? Iran, Russia, China was very much a supporter of Syria, but it was very kind of low intensity. And I think all that you're seeing is this continuing war for control of commodities, but it's scaling up. That's all. But I think, this has been coming for some time, and I think you're right. There's no solution right now, because, as you said, the rhetoric is diplomatic solution. The US keeps talking about ceasefire. The UK keeps talking about ceasefire. But I mean, there's no reality to this discussion. They know there's going to be no ceasefire.
That is it's a talking point for Western elites, but in the region, nobody's talking about that.
Exactly. You know, it's like peace in Ukraine. I mean, it's just a talking point because they have no intention of peace in Ukraine.
Mhm.
Either they will finish completely with the depopulation of Ukraine, which makes you wonder what it then becomes. But I mean, you know, that's what is effectively coming. Of course, it might be repopulated by the terrorists from Syria. I mean, I am being facetious there, but
Well, I mean, the Europeans particularly should think with they should be careful what they wish for, because you could have a very nasty rump state in
yes,
Ukraine, and
exactly.
the we were stabbed in the back. It was the Americans. It was the Europeans. I mean, it's the law of unintended consequences here. Okay. But yeah, I mean, but that's what we're seeing all over the place. The 2006 Condi Rice, you know, the remaking of the Middle East. Well, they've kind of adopted. Well, look what happened then, and they're saying it again now. I mean, there's so many moving pieces, so many variables out there. But one thing is for sure, the threshold of risk has gone up immensely, and it's
Yeah.
terrorizing.
And actually, this is one really important point because, you know, everyone in relation to Trump is talking about stopping nuclear war between Russia and Ukraine. And I've said this many times, the biggest danger for any kind of nuclear attack is Israel, because they have the Samson Doctrine, which Ariel Sharon spoke about in 2003, that he would even target alliance states if Israel's existence were to be threatened. Now we're at a point where quite genuinely Israel's existence is under threat. I mean, there's
Well, yeah,
talk already
it's under
that
threat. In what way? From Iran? How do you mean it's under threat?
well, it's under threat because it's fighting on 7 fronts, as Peter said. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's already been an announcement from Lebanon, from I think it's the Chemist Syndicate, that there's potential that there was a DU warhead, or even, you know, an enriched uranium warhead used to kill Nasrallah, because they said, one, it's impossible to create this level of crater without something pretty impressive, and plus they had analyzed the dust that was found circulating 2 kilometers from around the actual blast that assassinated Said Nasrallah. So, you know, and I think it was Yoav Gallant at Christmas 2023 who said, we have to have victory or we can't survive in the region. That's an existential threat to the existence of
Well, and
Israel. That was
also,
back in, go on, sorry.
but I mean, you can just look at raw economic data about Israel's economy. I
Yeah.
mean, just every single metric. I mean, labor, investment, exports. I mean, they're all in negative territory right now, and those that had the means to leave have left. Okay, so I mean, it adds to this kind of to be or not to be, this existential moment. And George, what Vanessa just said, we said that on my program over the weekend. You know, I mean, this, you know, we always worried about non-state actors getting their hands on the bomb, but we do have a state actor that is a lunatic and has a bomb. I
Exactly.
mean, this was
Yeah.
the worst possible scenario, you know, because Israel is treated as a sacred cow in Western mythology. But the fact is, there is a unstable actor in the world that has the capacity, the technology, and the intent, if necessary,
Yeah.
to.
And you also, you know, you have to bring in the kind of whacked out Christian Zionist, Jewish
Oh, yeah,
Zionist belief
yeah.
in Armageddon.
These
You can't,
people
you
that
know,
just
you can't ignore it.
Yeah, yeah. So, Peter, I think you moved. I think you can you hear Peter, Vanessa?
No,
I think you're mute.
I
oh my
lost
God.
him.
Oh no, I can hear you now. No, I
It
thought I
was my emotion that shut down my.
okay.
Quite possibly.
Go ahead, George. I'm sorry.
No, so then, you know, let's just think in terms of the immediate future? I mean, how what do you see as happening in the I don't know, in the coming weeks, next few months, say in Gaza, West Bank, then we talk about Lebanon, Iran, so on. So just in the immediate future.
In the immediate future. Um, it breaks my heart to have to say it, but I really can't see how, the Zionist agenda in Gaza and West Bank is going to be stopped. I mean, it's not going to destroy Hamas, but it is going to completely destroy, particularly Gaza, step by step. I think they will exactly what they've done in the northern sector. And of course, we're going back to, again, Ariel Sharon's five-finger plan, which was to divide Gaza up into five sections, with the Nephtarim corridor being the dividing factor. And so they've started in the north. And what have they done? I mean, they have literally flattened it. And of course, further displaced people, massacred.
Does Israel intend to annex the north of Gaza? That's going to be annexed by Israel?
Well, eventually, yes. I mean, if you listen to the settlement organizations, they're intense. And I mean, they held a celebration outside the walls of Gaza to talk about how they were going to resettle in Gaza. And they're prepared to do so. So, I think, yes, they're moving ahead with this plan. And of course, the resistance is, I have to say, and it's not only Hamas. I mean, we forget that there are multiple other brigades operating both in Gaza and in the West Bank, including the PFLP. The Hamas military wing is separate to the political wing, etc., etc. But the resistance has, it hasn't been cowed at all. I mean, it's still responding. The Qassam brigades they took out 4 high-level officers in the north. So the fight will continue there, but I don't see it being stopped at any time. I think Israel will potentially withdraw from on the ground in southern Lebanon, because having perhaps succeeded in destroying the habitat in a certain kind of buffer zone area, but they will continue the bombardment on the basis that everything belongs to Hezbollah, even the gold buried under the hospital and all these other kind of insane stories that they're coming out with. What was it? The planting of the Hitler doll and the swastika in one of the houses in the south. I mean, come on. But I think we will probably see an escalation in Syria in the coming months.
And the West Bank?
Well, the West Bank is ongoing. The West Bank, unfortunately, is very similar to Gaza. It just doesn't kind of reach the same propaganda levels, but they've been bombing.
Do you think there's going to be at some point, because you don't do genocide light, okay? There's no such thing. You do genocide or you don't. You think at some point the Egyptians and the Jordanians will be forced to open their borders for another Nakba?
I think there's 2 potential tripwires or circuit breakers in the Zionist agenda. One is, I think, the potential for an internal civil war. So
within Israel.
Yeah, between the far right and the right, because there's no left. There is no left in Israel. But I think there's potential for, and Alistair Kirk has spoken about this multiple times, the war between the Ben Gavirs and the Smotriches that now control and who have that religious fanaticism and who control the border guards, the internal security, the settlers, and they've been arming the settlers. So as Alistair pointed out, this could be a war between the Knesset and Judea and Samaria within Israel. That's one thing. The other thing is Ukraine of West Asia. because it's completely prostituted out to the Gulf states, to the United States. It's not a sovereign country anymore. You know, it's got a memorandum of understanding with Israel even back in 2022 to increase gas supply to Europe. It's completely in bed through the government with Israel, with the Gulf states that have normalized with Israel, with the US and so on. But the population isn't. And to some degree, the army isn't. You know, there was a lot of rebellion even within the army, at least through statements about when Israel killed an Egyptian soldier at the border in the Philadelphia crossing. So my hope, I have absolutely nothing to kind of back this up, other than I know the majority of the Egyptian population are not pro-normalization with Israel, and they are against the genocide. And the same in Jordan. I mean, the population is predominantly Palestinian. You know? So there is an opportunity there. Even in Saudi Arabia, you know, even in all the Gulf countries, they are facing backlash from their policy of normalization with Israel.
Well, you know, you know, George and I are fanatics for modern history. But, you know, in August 1914, when the great, and no one really wanted it, the Great War that started, but it ended. Its conclusion was the end of empires. And you know, I'm bringing that up is that the unintended consequences. I mean, we think, you know, you think Saudi Arabia. I mean, even people thought the Soviet Union would last forever, but these you know, these Gulf states, these are families, they're monarchies, they're not really nation states in a nominal sense. They're a lot more fragile than I think Western supporters think. Okay, my point is, it's wide open. Everything is wide open right now.
Yeah, it is. And I think when you talk about Saudi Arabia, of course, to a large degree, regionally, the battle is between Saudi Arabia and Iran for control, for dominance in the region.
Vanessa, how do you explain the fact that not one Arab state broke off diplomatic relations with Israel throughout this, you know, since October the 7th, 2023? This, you know, it's been more than a year, and not one Arab state broke off diplomatic relations with Israel. The minimum. I mean, there were non-Arab states that broke off diplomatic relations, but not one Arab state did that.
Well, when you say not one Arab state, of course.
Well, those that actually maintain diplomatic relations with Israel. Egypt,
well, Iraq,
Jordan,
even
Morocco.
Even the Iraqi government. Yes, but Morocco normalized with Israel back in 2022 under the Jared Kushner orchestrated Abraham Accords, which is an extension of the Oslo Agreement, right? Which is, you know, to the detriment of Palestinian identity, politics, nationalism, etc. So Morocco and Sudan normalized. And Morocco, of course, why? Because Israel perceived it as the gateway to Africa. And actually, Peter, sorry, just very quickly, I'm digressing again, but I know I'm allowed to. The Iranian attack, there are reports, of course, that there were missiles fired from Azerbaijan territory. Now, that is pretty explosive, because, of course, Azerbaijan is very much a client state of Israel.
Well, it could have been MEK. That's one suggestion.
Yeah, but from Azerbaijan territory, that's the point. You know, and let's not forget Raisi was in Azerbaijan when his helicopter crashed mysteriously. I still have questions over this.
Apropos my question, are we in the Third World War? I mean, look, you know, it's spreading. I mean, again, my eyeballs popped out as they fired from Azerbaijan. They're in the mix. Okay.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, they have been for some time, but of course, Iran is trying to basically, because its borders are fragile. But just to come back to the Arab state thing, when you're talking about those that haven't broken off relations with Israel, it's Saudi Arabia, Bahrain. In fact, Bahrain and UAE were instrumental in providing a land bridge to counter the Yemeni vessel blockade in the Red Sea. I wouldn't expect these states. I mean, Mohammed bin Salman very recently has said, I don't care about Palestine. So he's, in a way, vocalized what all of those Gulf states feel. We don't really care about Palestine. We just want to get on with our trade and economy because that's what makes them tick, right? Jordan, I wouldn't expect them ever to break relations. I mean, they provide air defense for Israel, for heaven's sake. Egypt, the same. It's completely captured by the Zionist movement. But the Arab states, even Iraq, and I would not call the Iraqi government fully compliant with the resistance ideology, but nevertheless, as a constitutional law, they don't recognize the state of Israel. Of course, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Palestine. So it's mixed. But I would rather say the Gulf states and the client states haven't broken off any trade relations with Israel, and they're not going to.
But just going back to the Azerbaijan thing, I mean, if that's true, Azerbaijan is also a close ally of Turkey. And so if Azerbaijan did take part in this attack, then that's Turkey. And that's always been an issue that which side is Turkey on? There's a lot of talk about Erdogan.
Exactly, they're on their own side.
They're right. On Erdogan's side.
Right.
Oh God.
No, but George is absolutely right, though. I mean, I think it was even today in today's news cycle, Foreign Minister Lavrov was quite pleased to support Turkey's involvement in BRICS. Okay, so I don't know what that actually really means.
No, I don't think it means it.
Erdogan, I don't know. George and I have done hundreds of hours on Erdogan, and he's a wonderful topic to discuss.
Yeah, I know. He's a phenomenon.
Very colorful. Sure. But I've always said he plays the bazaar, and he'll look for the best possible deal.
Right, he's long,
or to have his cake and eat it too.
Okay. Yeah, he's long on talk about Israel. That we're going to do this, and this on Israel, and then
supplying
nothing.
Oil from Baku. He's still supplying, iron and steel for the weapon industry, and this is just rhetoric, and this is what Erdogan does.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Vanessa, this was a really, really fascinating discussion. Really appreciate your giving us your time. And since you're in you're in the war zone, you're in the zone of danger, please be careful and join us again very soon.
And George, if you're going to put a title on this video, I would suggest Digressing with Vanessa.
Digressing. All right. So thank you very much. Thank you, Peter. And remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye-bye.